There's a fish that can change its own sex whenever the situation demands it. Not over generations, not through breeding. One individual, one lifetime, and one day it simply stops being male and becomes female instead, body and all. It sounds like science fiction. It's one of roughly 30 small, brightly striped fish living on coral reefs across the Indian and Pacific Oceans, and you already know its face, even if you've never thought about how strange its biology actually is. We're talking about the clownfish, also known as the anemone fish. And the sex change trick is just the opening act. Stick around, because by the end of this video, you'll understand why this tiny reef fish spends its entire life pressed against a living weapon capable of killing almost anything else that touches it, and somehow comes out unharmed, over and over again. Clownfish belong to the damselfish family, split across 2 genera, and every single one of them lives exclusively in warm tropical waters, from East Africa and the Red Sea, across the Indian Ocean, all the way to the Great Barrier Reef and the islands of the South Pacific. Not a single species exists naturally in the Atlantic. Nobody knows exactly why, though one leading idea is that Atlantic sea anemones simply never evolved the right chemistry to tolerate this kind of relationship in the first place. The common name itself has nothing to do with any formal classification. It simply comes from looks, since those bold stripes really do resemble circus face paint. And the exact pattern varies slightly from one individual to the next, almost like a fingerprint. Researchers who spend years watching the same colony on one patch of reef often learn to tell individual fish apart just from these small variations. A slightly wider bar here, a black outline shifted a touch to one side there. Body size varies quite a bit across the roughly 30 species in the group too. The smallest barely reach 3 inches as adults, while the largest species, more on that one later, grows to nearly double that length. For context, the size gap between the smallest and largest clownfish species is roughly comparable to the difference between a kitten and a medium-sized adult cat. A seemingly uniform little group of reef fish actually hides a surprising range of shapes and proportions. Speaking of that relationship, let's get straight to the question every diver asks the moment they first see it. Before we get into the exact mechanism, it's worth understanding where this whole arrangement came from in the first place. Based on genetic estimates and the fossil record, the ancestors of today's clownfish split off from the rest of the damselfish family somewhere between 12 and 20 million years ago. And the symbiosis with anemones itself, going by molecular clock estimates, didn't appear overnight. It likely developed gradually, starting perhaps as occasional shelter from predators that eventually hardened into a permanent, survival-critical partnership. Sea anemones as a group are far older still. They've existed in the oceans, by various estimates, since well before the first dinosaurs. In other words, the clownfish essentially domesticated something for housing that's vastly older than the fish itself. Sea anemones are close relatives of jellyfish and corals, soft-bodied predators with a ring of tentacles around a central mouth, each tentacle armed with thousands of microscopic stinging capsules that fire on contact, injecting venom and holding on tight while the anemone reels its meal in. For almost any small fish, crab or shrimp, brushing against those tentacles is a death sentence. For the clownfish, it's a place to sleep. The secret sits in a thin layer of mucus on the clownfish's skin. But here's the part that surprises most people. That mucus isn't special from birth. Anemone tentacles don't fire based on physical contact alone. They respond to a specific chemical signature detected on whatever touches them. A young clownfish meeting an anemone for the first time approaches carefully, brushing the tip of a fin against a tentacle, pulling back, trying again, and with every touch, over minutes or hours, its own mucus gradually shifts in composition until it starts to resemble the anemone's own chemical signature. In other words, the fish isn't born immune. It earns invisibility to the venom one cautious touch at a time, essentially talking its way onto the anemone's list of self rather than food. This exact process has been documented repeatedly in captive breeding facilities. Juvenile clownfish raised with no anemone in sight, when introduced to one for the first time, go through the acclimation almost like clockwork. Total caution first, then tentative fin taps, retreat, and only after hours, sometimes a full day, does the fish finally swim freely among the tentacles, as if unlocking a door that had been sealed the whole time. Interestingly, when several juveniles share a tank with one anemone, it's usually the boldest, most persistent individual that acclimates first, and its success seems to open the door for the rest, who settle in far faster once they've watched one of their own swim through unharmed. So why bother with something this risky in the first place? Because outside the anemone, the open reef is a far more dangerous place. Larger predatory fish patrol constantly, and the clownfish, typically somewhere between 3 and 7 inches long, is easy prey. But almost no predator is willing to chase a snack into a crown of stinging tentacles. The anemone becomes a personal fortress that almost nothing else can enter. And that partnership runs both ways, which is where things get genuinely interesting. The clownfish drives off other fish that do eat anemone tentacles, certain butterfly fish, for instance, charging at intruders many times its own size, like an oversized guard dog defending a very small yard, undeterred by the mismatch and rarely losing the standoff outright, since most intruders would rather retreat than risk a real fight over a single meal. It also cleans debris and parasites off the anemone's surface, and its waste supplies nitrogen and phosphorus that feed the symbiotic algae living inside the anemone's own tissue, which in turn photosynthesize and provide much of its energy. The fish's constant movement even improves water circulation around the anemone, delivering more oxygen to its tissue. Field studies consistently show that anemones hosting clownfish grow faster and handle environmental stress better than anemones living alone. There's a growing body of research suggesting the clownfish's bright coloration might do even more than that, potentially luring curious fish toward the anemone, which, unlike its mobile tenant, hunts by staying still and waiting for something to wander close enough to its tentacles. The clownfish itself is far from a picky eater, which is part of why the species breeds so easily in captivity. Its diet includes tiny zooplankton, algae, scraps of food dropped by the anemone during its own feeding, and occasionally small crustaceans that get trapped in the tentacles by accident. In a sense, the clownfish scavenges after its host almost the way a seagull picks over scraps behind a fisherman at the docks, except in this case, it pays the anemone back by actively cleaning, guarding, and maintaining the very thing it's feeding off of. This is a good moment to pause, because if this is your first time on this channel, subscribing now matters more than you might think. Recommendation algorithms typically only show a new channel to a viewer once, and if you just close the video without subscribing, there's a real chance you'll never see this channel again, no matter how much you enjoyed it. So if this is landing for you, go ahead and hit subscribe right now before we go any further. And while you're at it, drop a comment telling us which marine animal you'd like to see broken down next. We genuinely read all of them. Now, back to the anemone, because as territorial as clownfish are toward outsiders, their own social lives are stranger still. And this is where we get to the sex change trick we opened with. Every single clownfish is born male. There is no such thing as a female clownfish at birth. Sex isn't fixed genetically from the start. It's determined later, based entirely on an individual's position in the group hierarchy. Unlike species where sex is locked in from fertilization, a clownfish's biological future stays genuinely open for years, waiting on nothing more than its rank within a single small anemone. A single anemone typically hosts a small, tightly ranked family. One large dominant female, the only female in the group, one breeding male, and a handful of smaller, younger fish waiting their turn. The hierarchy is almost military in its precision. Each fish is noticeably smaller than the one ranked just above it, and that's not incidental. Dominant individuals actively suppress the growth of subordinates through hormonal signaling and near constant low-level aggression, keeping anyone from challenging the order too soon. That growth suppression isn't just a figure of speech either. Dominant fish keep subordinates under constant low-grade social stress, brief chases, shoving, demonstrative nips that don't cause real damage, but happen often enough to keep a younger fish permanently on edge. The result is that a fish genetically capable of growing quickly ends up effectively held back by social pressure from above, a strategy that looks harsh at first glance, but reduces internal competition for food and shelter, and appears to improve the odds that the whole small colony survives together as a unit. If the dominant female dies, eaten by a predator say, something remarkable happens. Biologists call it sequential hermaphroditism. The sole breeding male begins transforming physiologically and over the course of a few weeks becomes the new female, taking her place at the top of the group. The next fishing line, previously locked in developmental limbo, finally gets the chance to grow and become the new breeding male. This isn't just a behavioral shift either, it's a genuine physiological overhaul. The former male's gonads reorganize completely, hormone levels shift, and even body proportions change over time. The new female typically ends up noticeably larger than she was as a male. And there's no going back. Once a clownfish becomes female, it stays female, even if a breeding male vacancy suddenly opens up elsewhere in the group. Imagine a workplace where the most senior promotion permanently and irreversibly rewires the biology of whoever fills it, and you've got a rough sense of how rigid this system actually is. One consequence of that rigid hierarchy is one of the most extreme size differences between male and female found in any reef fish. The female in a breeding pair is almost always noticeably larger, sometimes nearly double the size of her male partner, which is the reverse of what most people are used to seeing in mammals and birds, where males are typically the larger sex. Divers seeing a clownfish pair for the first time sometimes mistake the size gap for a parent and juvenile, when in fact both fish are fully grown adults. That reversal, females outsizing males rather than the other way around, is actually fairly rare across the animal kingdom as a whole, and it tends to show up in species where males invest heavily in parental care rather than in physical competition for mates, which fits the clownfish's pattern of egg-guarding fathers almost perfectly. But sex change isn't even the most surprising thing about how long these fish stick around. For a fish barely the length of your palm, living 6 to 10 years in the wild would already be notable. But in stable captive conditions, dominant females have been documented living past 20 years, with some aquarists reporting individuals approaching 30. For context, that's longer than many small birds or mammals of comparable size live, and roughly comparable to the lifespan of certain dog breeds, an unusually long run for something this size on a reef. Scientists attribute this partly to a relatively slow metabolism, and partly to the fact that a dominant female rarely engages in direct physical combat. Her rank protects her better than any weapon could. Spawning happens right at the base of the anemone, usually on a cleared patch of rock, typically at night or just before dawn, often timed to a specific lunar phase, likely so hatching coincides with tidal currents that will carry the larva safely out to open water. And here's a detail most people never expect. It's the male, not the female, who guards the eggs. He fans them constantly with his fins for oxygen and will eat any eggs infected with fungus to keep the infection from spreading to the healthy ones. A single clutch can hold anywhere from a few hundred to well over 1,000 eggs, and for the entire incubation period, usually 6 to 10 days depending on water temperature, the male barely leaves the nest, cutting back on his own feeding and movement almost entirely. Aquarists who've watched dedicated males up close describe them fanning the clutch dozens of times a minute, generating a constant current around the eggs and speeding that fanning up even further if the water warms and oxygen runs short, almost like manually adjusting a tiny climate system to suit his future offspring's needs. Once hatched, the larvae abandon the reef completely. Tiny, nearly transparent, swept out into open ocean, where they drift with the plankton for 1 to 2 weeks. This is, in many ways, the single riskiest stretch of a clownfish's entire life. That microscopic larva has to find its way back to a reef, and not just any reef, but one with an anemone willing to take it in.
Research suggests larvae navigate using the reef's smell and, quite possibly, its soundscape. The crackle of coral, the clicks of other fish, the sound of waves breaking against the reef edge, all of which travel remarkably far through open water. During those 1 to 2 weeks adrift, the larva also goes through a striking transformation, from a nearly shapeless, transparent droplet with oversized eyes into a miniature but already recognizable version of the adult fish, complete with the flattened body shape and the first hints of its future stripes. This is exactly the stage where it's decided whether any given individual makes it to a suitable reef at all. By most estimates, out of the enormous number of eggs laid and larvae hatched, only a small percentage ever reach adulthood settled on an anemone. The rest become prey for other open water creatures before ever finding their way back. That's actually the standard strategy for many reef fish: offset massive losses with a massive number of eggs, rather than investing heavily in the survival of each individual larva. But for the clownfish, parental care doesn't end there. The surviving parent keeps defending the same territory that one day one of its own grown offspring might eventually return to, having spent its entire early life far from home. And this is exactly where a troubling piece of research comes in. Ocean acidification, driven by the ocean absorbing excess carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, appears, according to several laboratory studies, to interfere directly with the olfactory receptors of clownfish larvae. Put plainly, the fish can literally lose its sense of smell at precisely the moment in its life when finding its way home determines whether it survives at all. To get a sense of scale here, imagine someone finding their way home in an unfamiliar neighborhood purely by the smell of one specific bakery on the corner. And then that smell suddenly stops standing out among hundreds of other street odors. For a clownfish larva, ocean acidification may work in a similar way. The cue that once reliably steered it toward the right reef and the right anemone gets buried in chemical noise, and the fish just keeps drifting where it would once have confidently turned toward home.
There is a similar problem tied to sound. Researchers working on several Pacific reefs have spent years recording the acoustic backdrop of healthy reef sites and comparing it to the noise generated by passing ships, offshore drilling, and coastal construction. The results were discouraging. In controlled experiments, larvae played recordings of ordinary shipping noise instead of a natural reef soundscape, navigated noticeably worse, and were far more likely to drift straight past a suitable settlement site, continuing on into open water where survival odds drop sharply. In other words, alongside chemical pollution and warming, clownfish larvae now face a third, less obvious threat: ordinary industrial noise carrying for miles out to sea. Warming water brings its own separate danger, entirely apart from acidification and noise. The same heat stress that causes mass coral bleaching also affects anemones. At abnormally high temperatures, the symbiotic algae living in an anemone's tissue die off or abandon it entirely, and the anemone itself pales, weakens, and in some cases dies outright. The same bleaching process usually discussed in the context of coral reefs.
For the clownfish, that means losing its only shelter on the reef, even if the fish itself never directly suffers from the heat. Some researchers studying these events compare it to people continuing to live in a storm-damaged building. The roof technically still stands, but the ordinary rhythm of daily life is already broken, and that shows up in every small detail of behavior.
Observations on reefs that have gone through severe heat waves point to an even subtler effect. Even when a bleached anemone doesn't die outright, just weakens, the clownfish living in it behave noticeably differently, more agitated, straying from the anemone's body more often, tending eggs less carefully, generally acting like residents of a house they're about to be forced out of. There's also a purely human wrinkle to this story that has nothing to do with climate. After a certain animated film about a lost clownfish came out in 2003, global demand for clownfish as aquarium pets spiked dramatically, almost overnight.
By various estimates, a meaningful share of the fish sold in some regions still comes directly from wild reef collection rather than captive breeding, and that localized pressure can noticeably deplete clownfish populations in specific reef areas. Though fortunately, clownfish breed relatively easily in captivity, which has allowed much of the global aquarium trade to shift toward farmed stock rather than wild capture, easing some of the pressure compared to species that are far harder to breed in tanks. Local overharvesting can still hit specific reef patches hard though, especially in regions where wild-caught fish command a premium over farmed ones and where regulation of collection quotas is patchy at best. There's a flip side to that same cultural moment worth mentioning. The clownfish's sudden fame likely made it the single most effective ambassador for marine biology among people who'd never given coral reef ecology a second thought, kids and adults alike. Plenty of aquariums and educational programs around the world deliberately lean on the clownfish as an entry point into more serious conversations about reef ecology. Since the fish is already familiar and likable, it's far easier to explain coral bleaching, ocean acidification, or the consequences of overfishing using a face people already recognize than to start that conversation with a less familiar species. Now back to where we started. Why doesn't a tentacle capable of killing almost any other fish do anything to the clownfish? We've already covered the mechanism: gradual acclimation, a shifting chemical disguise in the mucus layer. But here's the final twist that ties it all together. That protection isn't permanent, and it isn't automatic. If a clownfish is separated from its anemone for an extended period, moved between aquarium tanks for study, say, the protective mucus layer breaks down, and the fish has to go through the entire acclimation process again from scratch, as though it had never touched those tentacles before. In other words, the clownfish's safety isn't some built-in superpower. It's an actively maintained, almost daily renewed relationship with one specific anemone. Separate them for too long, and the protection simply disappears. It's worth noting the size of this whole arrangement too. Roughly 1,000 species of sea anemone exist in the ocean, and only about 10 of them are capable of forming a stable partnership with clownfish at all, tolerating permanent company instead of digesting the guest at the first opportunity. Each of the roughly 30 clownfish species has its own set of compatible anemone hosts, and the match isn't universal. A fish that thrives with one anemone species may never manage to acclimate to another, as though each clownfish species carries its own narrow visa program, valid for only a handful of approved hosts. That specificity also explains why clownfish coloration varies so much from one part of the ocean to another. From deep orange with 3 white bars to nearly black individuals with a thin yellow trim, reflecting, in part, which anemones happen to be available in that particular corner of the reef. It's worth grasping the scale of that host relationship too. Roughly 1,000 anemone species exist across the world's oceans, and only about 10 are capable of forming a stable partnership with any clownfish at all, tolerating permanent company rather than digesting the guest at the first opportunity. Scientists mapping these preferences across different reefs sometimes compare the specificity to an extremely narrow diet in certain land animals, as if one species could only ever eat leaves from a single type of tree, while a close relative happily grazed on a dozen different species.
That mismatch in flexibility is part of why identifying which clownfish species lives on which reef isn't always straightforward for even experienced divers. You often need to check not just the fish's stripe pattern, but which specific anemone it's paired with, since the two clues together narrow things down far more reliably than either one alone.
The maroon clownfish deserves a special mention here. The largest species in the group, growing past 6.5 inches, carrying a sharp, bony spine on its cheek that most relatives lack, and holding a reputation as the single most aggressive anemone fish species around. Aquarium keepers routinely warn against housing it with smaller, calmer species, since conflict is nearly guaranteed. That spine isn't just decorative. It's used as an actual weapon during territorial disputes, and a jab from it can leave a noticeable wound even on a careless human hand reaching into a tank. At the opposite end sit two species that look almost identical to the untrained eye and occasionally confuse even specialists: the true percula clownfish and its near twin, the false percula, the very fish that inspired the animated character most people picture when they hear the words clownfish. The difference comes down to subtle details like the thickness of the black outline around the white bars and the number of rays in the dorsal fin, nearly impossible to spot underwater without a very close look. In places where the ranges of 2 or 3 clownfish species overlap, parts of Indonesia for example, researchers have documented natural hybridization, and the offspring of these pairings often display a blended in-between color pattern, as though nature itself hadn't quite settled which species to file them under. For both scientists and aquarium hobbyists, these hybrids are especially interesting, precisely because they show just how blurry the boundaries can be between species that otherwise look so cleanly distinct. And clownfish are far from silent either. Within a group, they constantly produce short clicking and popping sounds, something like crumpled cellophane, recorded and slowed down. These clicks come from a rapid contraction of specialized jaw muscles, not unlike cracking your knuckles, except repurposed as a full social signal. Larger dominant fish click sharper and more aggressively, reminding younger subordinates exactly where they stand in the group's pecking order. During courtship, the clicks soften and speed up into something researchers have started calling a kind of mating Morse code, distinct enough on a spectrogram that scientists can tell different click types apart almost like separate words. A warning click aimed at an intruder, a submission click directed at a larger fish, something closer to a greeting exchanged between breeding partners. Slowed down and analyzed on a spectrogram, these click sequences turn out to be far more structured than they sound to the human ear on first listen. Rapid bursts of several clicks in a row, distinguished by the exact length of the pauses between them, almost like a primitive form of Morse code with its own internal syntax. Outside the anemone, a clownfish is nearly defenseless. No venomous spines like a lionfish, no camouflage like a stonefish, no burst of speed like a barracuda. Its main predators are larger reef predators and especially moray eels, secretive coiling animals that spend much of their time tucked into reef crevices, rarely seen out in the open until the moment they strike, and can strike forward with startling speed for something so flexible, closing the distance in a fraction of a second once it commits. Unlike open water hunters that give chase in plain sight, a moray relies entirely on the element of surprise, usually striking in the exact moment its prey lets its guard down, something that almost never happens to an adult clownfish glued to its anemone, but becomes far more likely in the handful of seconds it spends exploring open ground nearby. Because of that risk, adults almost never wander more than a couple of feet from home. It's genuinely one of the most stay-at-home species on the entire reef, with individuals documented spending their whole lives within a 1 or 2 foot radius of a single anemone, never leaving it behind for good. Some of these long-lived reef households become minor local landmarks for dive operators. Guides who run the same route for years with different groups of tourists
will deliberately stop by one particular anemone to show off a familiar clownfish family, sometimes even giving them unofficial nicknames, tracking year after year which juveniles grow up and who eventually replaces the dominant female if she disappears for whatever reason. For a diver who returns to the same reef repeatedly over the years, recognizing their clownfish family by its exact stripe pattern becomes something close to a personal ritual, a quiet way of confirming that this particular corner of the ocean is still, somehow, the same as it was last time. There's an economic layer to all of this that rarely gets mentioned. Reef diving tourism built around anemone and clownfish pairs has become a meaningful source of income for coastal communities across much of Southeast Asia and Oceania. These photogenic duos routinely headline dive shop promotional material and top the search results of amateur underwater photographers. When a stretch of reef loses its anemones to bleaching and the clownfish along with them, tourist interest tends to drop noticeably, and with it, income for entire villages built around diving. The fate of a fish, barely the length of a finger, ends up tied not just to the ecology of one reef, but to the livelihoods of people living hundreds of feet from shore. It's striking, too, how quickly this small fish has become an unofficial shorthand for reef health among people with no scientific background at all. In conservation reports, tourism brochures, even children's science programs, a colony of clownfish nestled in vivid, healthy tentacles is routinely used as the picture of a thriving reef, set against the bleached, lifeless coral skeletons associated with degradation. There's a real irony in that popularity, though. It cuts both ways for the fish itself. On one hand, it draws attention and funding toward reef conservation broadly. On the other, that same fame as a household pet keeps local wild collection more profitable than more sustainable but less lucrative alternatives in some poorer coastal regions. There's also a research angle worth mentioning before we close.
This pairing, fish and anemone, has become something close to a textbook case for studying mutualism itself, the mutually beneficial relationship between two entirely different species. It's easy to observe, happens out in the open, in the same spot for years at a time, and shows the benefit to both sides with unusual clarity, which has turned it into a staple of ecology courses right alongside bees and flowering plants. Understanding exactly how a clownfish's mucus changes during acclimation helps biologists answer a much bigger question: how far an animal's chemical and immune signaling can go in negotiating with another species to stop being recognized as a threat. A mechanism also studied in other symbioses, from coral and their algae to gut bacteria in mammals. That research angle has practical stakes too. As more reef ecosystems face repeated bleaching events, understanding exactly how flexible or fragile this particular partnership is helps conservationists predict which reef sections are likely to bounce back and which ones are at greater risk of losing both species together.
There's an entirely separate line of research too that somewhat unexpectedly put clownfish among the most studied fish on any reef. Geneticists use them as a model for studying sex change in vertebrates more broadly. Understanding exactly which genes switch on and off during the male-to-female transformation helps answer a much wider question: just how flexible biological sex can actually be in animals, and through which precise molecular switches nature manages to work around something that seems, at first glance, fixed rigidly at birth. In some long-studied populations, biologists have actually managed to follow the entire arc of a single anemone's history, documenting, week by week, how a breeding male transformed after the original female was lost to a predator, and how the next-in-line subordinate finally began growing freely for the first time in its life, taking over a role that had been off-limits until then. It's a bit like picturing an organization where the single most senior promotion irreversibly rewires the biology of whoever fills it, and where an entire line of hopefuls waits, sometimes for years, for one vacancy to open up.
So back to the question one more time.
Why doesn't a weapon that kills almost anything else touch the clownfish? Gradual acclimation, a shifting chemical disguise, and, as we just covered, a protection that has to be actively renewed for as long as the relationship lasts. And here's the final twist, the one that ties the whole story together. This small, seemingly optional partnership turns out to matter far more to the reef as a whole than it first appears. Anemones hosting clownfish grow faster, resist disease better, and, according to some studies, survive heat stress longer than anemones living alone. That means the health of clownfish populations is directly tied to the health of entire sections of reef. This small, brightly colored fish ends up functioning as one of the better indicators of how the surrounding ecosystem is actually doing. When clownfish start disappearing from a stretch of reef, it's almost always a sign that something has already gone wrong there, long before it becomes visible to anyone looking down from the surface. It's also worth remembering that the clownfish's own protection was never guaranteed for life either.
Separate a fish from its anemone for too long, moving it between aquarium tanks, say, and that protective layer breaks down, forcing the fish to start the whole slow tentacle by tentacle process of acclimation over again, exactly as we described at the start of this video. In other words, the peace between clownfish and anemone is never a contract signed just once. It's an agreement that has to be renewed almost daily across a lifetime that, as we've seen, can stretch on for decades. One last thing worth knowing if you're ever snorkeling near a reef and spot a pair like this yourself, it's best not to touch either animal with your hands. Even a light touch can damage the anemone's delicate tissue or strip away the clownfish's protective mucus layer, forcing it to restart that entire slow acclimation process we opened this video with, and for however long that takes, the fish is left almost completely unprotected inside its own home.
Perhaps that's the most unexpected part of this whole story. A fish that looks like a decorative afterthought on a coral reef, the kind of thing you'd expect to see on a postcard, turns out to be one of the very few living things capable of sharing space with one of nature's more effective weapons, not through strength, speed, or venom, but through a patient, constantly renewed agreement with something that could kill it at any moment. That's it for today. If you enjoyed this one, hit like and subscribe if you haven't already. It genuinely helps the channel keep making videos like this. And let us know in the comments, which marine animal should we cover next?